You don't have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens.
Please stay back.
You don't have the, I'm not obstructing. I'm standing right here in the hallway. I asked to see the judicial warrant. By asking for a judicial warrant, you don't have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens asking for a judicial warrant.
The trial for an ICE protester starts tomorrow. It's for Brad Lander, who at the time was a New York City Comptroller. He and other officials and about 100 protesters went to observe the conditions at 26 Federal Plaza. They wanted to go inside because a federal judge had just said that they were being held in inhumane conditions. Instead, he was arrested twice and charged with a federal misdemeanor charge of obstructing the use of the federal building. The others charged and arrested took a plea, but he decided to go to trial because he wanted to put forward a defense. His novel defense was that they could not charge him with the obstruction of the lawful use of the building because what they were doing was essentially not reasonable and lawful. That trial and the evidence he uncovered will start tomorrow, but today we have him here to discuss. As the protests around the ICE facility in Delaney Hall really are ramping up, it's a reminder of the ICE protests that happened last year, both in June in Los Angeles, New York in September. Brad Lander was one of the 10 municipal officials who protested with a group of 100 people at 26 Federal Plaza because they were detaining more people there than normal, to such an extent that there was really inhumane conditions, so much so that a federal judge had actually said that it was cruel and inhumane conditions. So they went there to observe. They went there to protest. Brad Lander was one of the people who was arrested. And rather than just take a plea and have this to be dismissed, he asked for a jury trial. He asked for a jury trial, despite the fact that this is not always given, a jury trial in this context. It is a misdemeanor charge and doesn't always get it. But he wanted the evidence to come to light as to what exactly was happening. What was ICE doing at 26 Federal Plaza with the detainees? And it's in part his defense. It's a really interesting and novel defense that he's raising. Well, that trial is happening. It's happening on the 10th, and I have Brad Lander here to talk about why he decided to take this to trial and really why he decided to protest in the first place and what more needs to be done, frankly, to protect the detainees.
So great to be on with you. Thank you for the invitation.
No, thank you. And so let's first talk about the trial, because this was important to you for this to go to trial. As I said, you were the only one who was arrested who decided to take this to trial. It was a federal misdemeanor charge for obstructing federal property and the use of the federal property. And it's the use that you really are using as a defense, because part of the charge has to say that you impeded the use of the property by the federal employees, essentially. And your argument is that if their use was illegal, right, or unlawful, then you didn't impede their lawful use of it. And this is how it sounds like you're trying to get into evidence the wrongdoings that ICE was really doing in there. So speak to that.
Yeah. So this was last September, as you say, and I was first arrested at 26 Federal Plaza in June, accompanying an asylum seeker named Edgardo out of the building. And that day they held me for about 4 hours, and they ultimately deported Edgardo to Venezuela. Over the summer, we learned that they were keeping people in really abominable conditions in the 10th floor detention facilities at 26 Federal Plaza, which was not designed to have people staying overnight. There aren't beds, there aren't bathrooms, and they just basically started throwing people on the floor. And so I had reached out to say I thought there were building code and fire code violations under New York City law. And as you rightly note, a federal judge had indicated that the conditions were illegal. We have since learned that the detentions themselves were illegal. The guidance ICE has been relying on for abducting people at immigration courts in particular, the U.S. attorney for the Southern District had to file a paper before the judge, like a mea culpa, and say, Your Honor, it turns out that guidance never applied to federal immigration court. So ICE has known all along that these are unlawful detentions. Nonetheless, what they charged me with was, as you say, under the Code of Federal Regulations, unreasonably obstructing the usual use of the federal facility. Well, the usual use of the 10th floor of 26 Federal Plaza is not for people to be detained overnight in large numbers, and not for people to be grabbed in the hallways by masked thugs who don't give a judicial warrant, who don't present a reason. And so we thought it was important to go in September, about 100 people strong, 75 New Yorkers downstairs on Duane Street, and then 10 other elected officials and I went up to the 10th floor, and we asked to see the detention conditions. And we said we weren't going to leave until we got to see them, given what that judge had said and given the letters that I had sent about violations of city law. And at first they said, well, we're not letting you in, but you can stay here as long as you like. And then very quickly they changed their tune and arrested us. But the reason they gave when they arrested us, they said basically we're protesting unlawfully. But protesting unlawfully is not a federal misdemeanor in the Code of Federal Regulations. And I thought it was important to take the case to trial because we are part of this much broader movement of thousands of people from Minneapolis to Delaney Hall to the detention facilities in Florida and Texas. The crime is not what we were doing, demanding access. The crime is what ICE is doing, unlawfully and unconstitutionally abducting and detaining our neighbors. And that's what this trial is a part of that much broader movement of civil resistance in which, tens of thousands of Americans are standing up for the rule of law.
In your legal memo, you highlight how particularly egregious it is for them to be detaining people, kidnapping people when they are showing up for their court hearings, because this is where, this was about what you were protesting specifically. And we have seen ICE also on the streets, but this is, they're talked about it being illegal, somebody here illegally. People are trying to go through the legal process. And there was 50,000, you put it as a fact, there was 50,000 people that got deportation orders for failing to show up to their hearings. I believe it was in 2025, that statistic. And you believe, and I believe rightly so, in part because they have now made it so scary for people to do the right thing and show up.
Yeah. I mean, of course, it's abominable to grab people off the street or from their workplace or from their home or from the front of their kid's school. And we've got people watching and protesting in those cases. But there's something particularly egregious about using immigration court as a trap for asylum seekers, because those asylum seekers are doing exactly what they're supposed to do by going to their court hearings in basically every case. And yes, we're talking about tens of thousands of cases. These are people who, when they crossed into the country, did in fact stop at a Department of Homeland Security or, Border Patrol facility and say, I'm coming in seeking asylum or other status. And they got assigned a court date. And then they went and showed up in their court dates. And there's law going back hundreds of years that says you want court to be a place where people know they are able to come. And, if they're a witness or if they're, have a removal order, whatever it is, that they show up. And if the government has a case to make, the government should make the case to that judge. But not in one case did I hear the government say, okay, we are now seeking to detain this person. And, instead, the government would make their motions. The judge would give the person a next court date to come back for their individual hearing or transfer their jurisdiction to a different location where they were living. Or if they were a young person seeking what's called special immigrant juvenile status, things have to be determined in family court, if that's a kid who's without their parents, all kinds of different adjudications. and people would then leave the courtroom and be abducted in the hallway lawlessly. Again, someone would not come and say, this has anything to do with the case you just had. They wouldn't say anything at all. They just grab them. And in almost every case where then lawyers filed a habeas proceeding in federal court and were able to say to a genuine federal judge, Your Honor, this was a violation of this person's rights. They had just been in immigration court. In the vast majority of cases, they got released. So yes, using the courthouse as an abduction trap. I mean, there have been so many violations of the rule of law and people's civil and human rights. But this one is especially egregious, and that's part of why, I want to take this case to trial. I will say they have pioneered new ways of trying to take advantage of people in court. Just last week, the government, Department of Homeland Security, the Trump administration started doing these things they're now calling mega master calendar hearings, where they're accelerating people's cases by 6 months, giving judges who typically would see 20 or 30 people in a day, 120 people in a day. And as you said, in some cases, people are afraid to show up because they've seen on television what might happen. And their cases are being accelerated, so some people might not even be getting the mailed notice. We've got a lot of asylum seekers here in shelters, which are notoriously bad at giving people their mail. But if you fail to show up, whether because you didn't get your notice or out of fear that you might be abducted, or it was supposed to be 6 months from now, if you don't show up, then the judge may order your removal. So it's a kind of a Faustian choice that people have. Do I go and risk being abducted and detained, or do I not go and risk being abducted and detained?
And and when you're speeding it up, they don't have time to get a lawyer. They're probably going to need a pro bono lawyer most organizations are really overworked, or a translator. I mean, that's the point, is stripping people of due process in as many different ways as possible. A good friend of mine here in Los Angeles self-deported last summer, despite the fact that I'm a lawyer. And I was like, we'll try to help. But people didn't feel as if they could get due process, which is why I'm so grateful that you did the good trouble of showing up, and you still continue to go and observe, by the way. You still continue to go. I believe you go every week.
Yes, just about every week. I was there last week to witness 2 of these mega master calendar hearings. I sat in one room where young person after young person had their case accelerated. A lot of kids who were here without their parents, and just so cruel. And yes, if you're accused of a criminal act, then you have the right to a lawyer, right? That's your Miranda rights. But in immigration court, you don't have a right to a lawyer, and many, many people can't afford it. There's so many more cases in immigration court that all the immigration lawyers have their dockets all booked up. And so many people are going through this whole process, facing deportation back to a country that they, in many cases, fear persecution if they're returned. Many of them, of course, don't speak English and wind up in court with no lawyer and with a translator. And now that is one thing cities and states can do more of. In New York, both the city and the state do provide some funding for immigration lawyers. We talk a lot about what it means to be a sanctuary city and not have your police force collaborate with ICE. But one thing that cities and states can do is provide the resources to make sure that more people have a lawyer when they face Department of Homeland Security or ICE in immigration court.
And really, Congress trying to pass this ICE bill to buy more detention centers, basically, is a farce, right? Because they did not commit a crime. There's no reason to detain people. If it really is a backlog in the system, you would just hire more judges. The point of this is not actually to properly vet people. The point is to create a new for-profit prison center, essentially, it seems.
And to make people afraid. This goes to your point about self-deportation. If people see that conditions at Delaney Hall are so bad that people are on hunger strike, or they watch these violent arrests, which I believe is part of what they were trying to show when they arrested me, but of course far worse with people who are then facing detention. The cruelty is the point. They want people to be afraid and then consider leaving on their own or skipping their hearing, so then they'll be removable. Look, and whatever, Stephen Miller and his brown shirts. I don't know how much it's that they just get off on cruelty and how much it's strategic to show people cruelty so that they'll consider leaving on their own. But that's what they're doing here.
Well, you have spent your entire life either in nonprofit or in public service. So I'm really grateful that you are willing to go to trial to put the spotlight on this very, very important issue, because there are so many people, the people affected, right? The either documented or undocumented going through the system do not feel as if they can talk about this. It needs somebody like you to be able to talk about this. What can we expect from your trial? What do you want us to pay attention out of that trial?
Yeah, so my trial's on Wednesday, June 10th. I've got great lawyers. Deirdre Von Dornum, who used to be the head of the Federal Defender Services here, is representing me pro bono. And we're trying to call attention exactly to the conversation we've been having here, like remind people these arrests in courthouses are lawless to begin with. So the crime's not what I'm doing. The crime is what ICE is doing. The detention conditions that they had, I'm happy to say, on the 10th floor of 26 Federal Plaza, they've mostly stopped detaining people. But they were in cruel conditions last summer when I was arrested. And now at Delaney Hall and at so many other facilities around the country, they're still keeping people in cruelly illegal conditions. That's another violation. And we need to keep speaking up, showing up, doing ICE Watch, doing Court Watch. And that's really, I guess, what I hope people will see. Maybe the most gratifying thing that people have said to me over the past year, they'll say, Mr. Lander, when I saw you get arrested either in June or September, that was the day that I signed up to go and do court watching. And when I went out to Minneapolis in January, they told me that in the week after Renee Good and Alex Preddy were killed, 10,000 people in Minneapolis signed up to go do ICE Watch or walk kids to school or do mutual aid, having seen that you could risk your life by doing it. There is a movement of Americans protecting our immigrant neighbors, saying we value that statue in the harbor, reminding us of who we are as a country. When we celebrate our 250th anniversary in a couple of weeks, this is a great immigrant country. And we're not going to let these fascists in the White House or these rogue ICE agent brown shirts in our streets, change that country in the way that they're trying to. And so there's so many ways people can get involved. So many people have marched in the No Kings marches. And if you want to take a next step, you can go do court watching. You just sit in a courtroom in the immigration court in your city or town and make sure the rule of law is followed. And if people are abducted on the way in or the way out, you help get their names and try to make sure they have a lawyer to get them out. It's a big movement of Americans. And, in Minneapolis especially, you felt it as like the good neighbors of Minneapolis just showing up to protect their neighbors. And we're part of one big movement together. And I hope my trial can continue to strengthen that movement.
Well, we really appreciate you showing up and really appreciate you coming and talking to us about it. Keep up the good work. We're so grateful. We need so many people like you, because this is definitely just an uphill battle right now with the Trump administration for sure. But thank you for coming and talking to us about it.
Thank you so much for talking to me about it. And keep up the good work. Let's all, they pushed ICE out of Minneapolis, those good neighbors. If we stick together and keep showing up and keep fighting, we're going to win too.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.